Good afternoon, welcome. It's great to be with all of you again. Welcome to day 4 of healthy, natural, evidence-based ways to improve memory and prevent dementia. As usual, we are recording our session, so your participation is giving us permission to allow others to see this. And I will leave us unmuted so that we can have spontaneous conversation as long as that is working. So let's do a quick review of where we've been so far. On day 1, we talked about how memory loss and dementia occur. They take time to occur, decades typically. So there's time to intervene, there's time to make a difference, and it's worth starting to invest in your brain health in your 40s and 50s. What you do in your 40s and 50s makes a big difference in your risk of getting dementia in your 70s and 80s. We also talked about the fact that the medical community, of which I am a part, does not offer much hope or very many solutions, but there is hope, and the scientific literature shows that up to 50% of dementia cases can be prevented, and that's why we're here, because I have a passion for helping people to improve their memory, and I feel like there's a big unmet need where people are not being educated on the things that can be done. I have a personal experience because my mother had Alzheimer's, but there's many things I could be doing with my time. I'm here because I care about you, and I don't want you to go through what my mother went through, what I went through, or what my dad as her caregiver went through. So day 1 was about motivation and seeing why it's important that we invest in our brain health. And then we talked about my proprietary formula, the FAST formula. So who remembers what the F in FAST stands for? You have to unmute. I think everybody's muted.
Food.
Food, yes, thank you, Jennifer. F is for food. So we talked about avoiding sugar. You wouldn't expect your car to run well if you put ice cream in your gas tank, because the car is designed to run on gas. So why do we expect our bodies to run well? When we feed them sugar, they were not designed to run on sugar. We talk about the importance of DHA, which is the good omega-3 oils that you need to get. Most people do not get enough, and taking a DHA supplement is a great way to address that. Vegetables, we talked about how important vegetables are. The more the better, and high vegetable diets have amazing benefits for preventing and treating dementia and memory loss. We talked about not eating processed foods, the benefits of berries and walnuts, and how fantastic the MIND diet is if you want to invest in a full diet. So who remembers what the A in FAST stands for? Everybody's muted, most people. Anybody?
Activity.
The A is for activity, and there were 3 different subsets to our activity discussion. Physical activity, exercise is so powerful, has huge benefits for the body, and a dose-related benefit for memory. The more you do, the more it helps your memory and helps, again, prevent and treat memory loss. We looked at brain activity. Use it or lose it. You got to use that brain and use all the different aspects of it to keep it working well. And we talked about social activity, how important it is to stay connected to people. We were designed to be in connection with others. And today we're going to talk about stress, sleep, and treating diseases. And first, let me just share my screen. Is that showing correctly for everyone? Can you see the screen?
It's not showing correctly.
Yes, I can see it.
It's got the slides on the left.
Oh, it does?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're just not in slide mode, Susan, that's all. We could see the slide, but you're not in slideshow mode.
Yeah. Hi, Susan. Good to have you here.
Great to be here.
I can't believe the scenery for Justin Connors. Justin, that's an amazing background. Sorry, I just had to say something.
Louis the 14th.
Susan, that was terrific.
Thank you.
That's working. Okay.
This isn't my real office, by the way.
That's your office?
No, it's not my office. I just wanted to make that clear.
I don't know. I love Susan's background. I'll take that.
Yeah, well, we're talking about stress today. So we have the waves lapping on the beach to help us relieve our stress. So let's follow up on the homework from last night. Does anyone have any comments, or did they make any great discoveries in terms of ways to get more exercise and activity, or what gets in the way of doing more? Any thoughts anyone wants to share? Or any of the three ways to increase socialization? That one's really important right now. With COVID-19, it's a challenge to socialize. So we need creative ways to do it, but it's still really important to connect, whether it's like this over video or phone. Anyone have any?
In terms of exercise, for me, I think I realized that it's really easy to be too ambitious when you exercise and get sore, and then you stop exercising. So what I found is exercising in tiny little bits so you don't get sore and you build up stamina.
That's a really good point, Justin. Yeah, if people engage too fast, too quickly, you can get discouraged. That's good. Yeah.
And
anything else?
Susan, just for me, I think it's been little by little, but I think with this shelter in place, after the first 2 weeks, we were getting cabin fever, and I moved a lot of my exercise. I tried to go out every day for very long walks, listening to my, iPhone or iPod or something. And I moved a lot of exercise equipment in the living room. And not that my living room is big, but I've been doing light weights and spin bike if I can't go out and bike. And I got super down the other day and went out. It was a beautiful day. I went out for a very long bike ride and came back a different person. So it'll just change your whole disposition. And then as I started about week 3 doing some video cocktail hours on Zoom with my girlfriends, that has changed the world. Just the human connection that you spoke about.
Yes, those can be really fun.
Yes.
We did a birthday party for me on Zoom, and it was great fun. And yes, those are great ideas. Really good. Thank you. That's excellent. All right, so let's go ahead and go to, we're in day 4. We're going to do stress, sleep, and treat diseases. So we talked about the formula: food, activity, stress, sleep, treat diseases, and thoughts are the main categories that have the most data for improving your memory and preventing dementia. So stress is a very interesting one. If you're like me, I used to think that stress was a good thing, and I wanted to have adrenaline rushes, and I worked crazy hours, actually commuted from the Bay Area to Seattle for a few years and was on an airplane every 3 days for 3.5 years, including getting up at 3:45 in the morning to take the 6 a.m. flights every Monday. And our society actually kind of almost encourages a level of activity that is stressful. But stress is not good for your body, particularly chronically. So stress is designed our bodies were designed so that if the lion is chasing us, we release adrenaline so that we can be really focused and do the fight or flight and run away. And that works well in the immediate term. But if a week later you're sitting at your office trying to work and you're still thinking about running away from the lion, that's not working. And stress can actually completely take your brain offline. It definitely hinders attention. So stress is actually an actual or anticipated threat to our well-being. So it can be internal thoughts or it can be external, but it is our reaction when we're concerned about our well-being. And it has a huge biological significance. We release cortisol, the adrenal glands release cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and stress causes inflammation and oxidation. We've talked about those in the cascade of events that leads to memory loss. It actually damages the neurons and the neuron connections. I think most of us know that it's not good for our immune system. And if you already have brain lesions, and we've talked about the fact that those lesions and those neurons dying and the brain shrinking starts many decades before your first memory loss symptom. So most of us have existing brain lesions and it worsens those lesions. So it is really pretty significant in its impact on the body. And when you're under that stress on an ongoing basis, chronically, it actually changes your genetic material, which is pretty shocking. Again, it damages the nerves. You lose those connections between the nerves. It damages the glia, which are the cells that actually clean up the brain and the brain area. And it's been shown to impact a large number of different areas of cognitive function. So short-term memory, long-term memory, visuospatial processing, executive function. And they know that it is a big issue for memory. In fact, it's so well known, they've coined the term stress-induced amnesia for the memory loss that happens from being under stress. So the scientific literature is very clear that there's a cause-effect relationship between stress and having memory loss, as well as having mood disorders. And they have identified high levels of cortisol in Alzheimer's patients. So the evidence that stress is leading to Alzheimer's is there and continuing to be developed. The question is, can lowering your stress change your risk? So if I spent 25 years under intense stress from work, from relationships, from whatever, and I now choose a less stressful lifestyle, is that going to make a difference? That's really hard to assess. Stress, the clinical research on stress is a bit difficult because it's difficult to measure stress. Much of this is going to be self-reported. And everybody responds differently to stressful situations. For some people, it might be extremely stressful. Other people have learned ways to handle that. They have coping mechanisms and they won't experience the same amount of stress because it is an internal reaction, again, to either actual or perceived threats. So many of them are perceived threats. Feeling like we're losing control is a common cause of stress. But the question is, what level of control are you looking for? And what does control look like? So some people who are more control oriented will be more stressed by situations. So here's the data. One study showed that stress impaired cognitive flexibility in comparison to not having stress. So cognitive flexibility is an executive function. It's decision making and switching between topics. those who perceived that they had, again, these are self-rated because that's commonly a way to measure stress. Those who perceived that they had more stress on an ongoing basis said they had more complaints of memory loss. And here's a huge study, 7,000 patients studying them over 25 years. And this is pretty shocking. Each additional stress symptom increased the risk of dementia by 2%. So if you said, I have stress at work, I have stress in my relationship with my spouse, I have time stress, for each additional area where you listed that you had a stress symptom, each one of those impacted the risk for dementia. And if you have a whole bunch of stressors in a number of different areas, it actually led to a 40% increase in risk. So these are the data showing there's a very clear link between having stress and it leading to memory loss and potentially dementia. Midlife stress, so this is another one we've seen with other things like hypertension and cardiovascular disease, that experiencing them in the midlife, in your 40s and 50s, increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease. Sometimes having them in your 70s and 80s doesn't impact the risk of Alzheimer's all that much, but having them in midlife particularly is an issue. So again, start early with our stress reduction and our other ways of investing in our brain. So there's 300 studies over 30 years showing this impact on the body, also on mood. Obviously, stress leads to anxiety and can often lead to depression. They have actually shown a direct link with having more illnesses. It impacts your immune system, but your overall health is not as good if you are under chronic stress, especially if it's extreme. Here's a study in people with dementia. So they've already got the severe memory loss. And the stress and loss and depression had 4 times the risk of dementia. So chronic stress is accelerating the onset of the Alzheimer's disease, as well as increasing the likeliness that you get it. And another study showing stress in midlife, increasing memory loss, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. So what can we do about stress? And I'm sure that many of you probably have some ideas to add in here. One thing is not stuffing your emotions. So talking to a friend, talking to anyone, even if it's a therapist, helps to get things out. Taking care of yourself. Some stress situations, in my opinion, are often lack of valuing ourselves and taking care of ourselves. So being good to ourselves is something that we can do, and we can teach others what we need. Set boundaries, ask for what we want, ask for what we need. If we see that a situation is stressing us, do something about it. Exercise is huge. Exercise and stretching makes a very big difference. It's a great stress reliever. And Susan just gave us an example of her bike ride that completely changed the way that she felt. Because a loss of control is often a stress inducer, finding ways to take control, manage your time can be helpful. And of course, there's deep breathing exercises, music therapy. A lot of the social things help. Support groups. There are a number of free audio guides for stress reduction online. And if people are interested in some of the apps for relaxation and mindfulness, we can share some of those. It's helpful not to use caffeine and to avoid alcohol and drugs, because when people are really stressed, they often want to cover it up. And we cover it up with escaping through alcohol and other things, but that does not do anything to address the underlying issues, and it doesn't really address the stress in the long run. So here are some additional ways. This is a process that you can employ to help manage stress. setting goals so that you know what it is you want. Sometimes, if you're like me, I have been the hamster on the wheel and I'm just running the wheel faster and faster without really prioritizing what is it that I want to do. And half the time we could not do the bottom 50% of our to-do list and things would still be fine. So really being clear on our goals and what we're trying to achieve and taking action. When you're stressed, it's easy to just sit in the stress and wallow in that and not get to the point of taking action, and taking action actually helps. And we are doing some of these positive declarations here, and we'll talk more about these last 3 tomorrow. But it does help to imagine yourself more peaceful, to make declarations of positive things and that you're feeling less stress, thinking about yourself as being calm. And thankfulness is amazing. We'll talk more about that later. It does help get you out of the cycle of stress. So does anyone want to comment on things that they have done that have helped with addressing stress? We live in such a high stress society. We, at least, you know, I'm in the Bay Area. So those of us that are in the Bay Area, it's always hectic. Anyone?
I love doing projects. Like
Doing projects, Carolyn?
cross stitch.
Yeah. Yeah, cross stitch. Yes, just something calming and repetitive.
Yeah.
Yes, that frees up your mind. That's good. Yeah, hobbies. Anything you enjoy. Yeah.
Trying to open myself up to different kinds of possibilities and look at the way some people live their lives that could be very different than what is traditionally acceptable, and try to open my mind to considering things like that.
Yes. Yes. Excellent. Excellent. That's good. And saying no is the big one, right? We don't have to meet everybody else's expectations. Okay, let's talk about sleep. This is another one that our society sends very weird signals about. And 100 years ago, the medical community and the scientists used to think that sleep was just a waste of time. And I have certainly had managers who thought that and wanted me to be working all the time. But it's now completely clear that sleep is hugely important to your health. And you need not just hours of sleep, but you need good quality sleep. And adults need 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. You can drop it a little bit when you're over 65, but sleep is when our body is healing. There's all kinds of important restoration going on during our sleep. And who knows what the #1 determinant of whether you remember what you learned today, tomorrow. What's the most important thing for your memory?
Sleep.
Getting enough sleep. We actually consolidate our memories at night when we sleep. So for the longer term memories, accessing what we did before, if you didn't get good sleep that night, you might not have your memories consolidated and be able to remember as well. The procedural memory, which is doing tasks, it's also called motor skills, and declarative memory, which is your, it is a short-term memory and it's processing words. Those suffer the most from sleep deprivation. So that means doing things and thinking clearly. Doing tasks and thinking clearly are the biggest things that suffer when you don't get enough sleep. They seem like important things. Lack of sleep has been shown to increase dementia, stress. So stress makes it hard to sleep, and not sleeping well makes you stressed. So there's a big interaction there. Lack of sleep has actually been correlated with increases in the rates of diabetes. It definitely impacts weight gain. and memory loss. There's a long-term effect as well in terms of long-term memory decline and dementia. So sleep loss can impact dementia and can help cause dementia, but it's also one of the main reasons that patients end up being institutionalized, because the dementia itself also causes difficulties in staying asleep. So only 30% of the population of this country gets 6 hours of sleep or more a night. So we've got a third of the population that is chronically sleep deprived. And again, I think our culture tends to encourage not getting enough sleep, but it's not good for our health. So here is a study that showed that sleep deprivation laid down those tau plaques that are inside the neurons that make the neurons not work very well. And it increased the rate at which you got dementia for those who got dementia. And it can single-handedly be responsible for dementia. I should have mentioned that stress by itself does not usually cause dementia. You usually need additional contributors, but lack of sleep can single-handedly lead to dementia. And even one night of not getting enough sleep has dramatic effects. It increased both of the protein and plaque deposits on the brain, and you lack focus and get forgetful from one night of sleep, missing one night, and it impacts your driving, which is huge. Another study showed that women sleeping 5 hours a night or less were more likely to be obese, so that's impacting the weight gain, and a number of other studies. So what can we do? One thing is just being committed to actually getting sleep. So lying in bed for the 8 hours is one thing. Then there's some people that have difficulty falling asleep when they're in bed. So it's important for your circadian cycle, which is your natural body cycle, that you go to bed at about the same hour every day. So if you go to bed at 11 o'clock one night and 1 o'clock the next night and 3 o'clock, your body does not get on a regular cycle and it doesn't expect to go to sleep at a certain time. Obviously, avoiding caffeine within the time frame where it's going to impact your sleep is important. Many people don't have their rooms set up well to go to sleep and maintain sleep. It's important to, some people, I am very sensitive to light. I don't like light when I'm sleeping. You get accustomed to what things bother you, but being sure that it's quiet and dark is great. If you have troubles getting asleep or staying asleep, you can use melatonin, which occurs naturally and which helps regulate your circadian cycle. It is available over the counter as a supplement. And a good diet and exercise are huge. When you exercise, you sleep better. So it's also important to turn off your electronic devices before you go to bed and potentially have them in another room. The blue light, there is an app that you can do. The blue light right before you go to bed. So many kids are playing video games right before they go to sleep, and that actually makes it harder for you to go to sleep. There are apps that dim the light on your phone at a certain hour so that it reduces that issue, and of course they can wake you up. So you can play music. You should definitely get sleep disorders diagnosed. Lots of people have sleep apnea where they're waking up many times in the middle of the night and haven't gotten that diagnosed. We've talked about that as a big risk factor for dementia in general. And there's lots of different tools that are available at thesleepfoundation.org if sleep is an issue for you, other than just making the decision that you're going to be in bed. How many of you would say you sleep pretty well, fall asleep easily, and get good sleep? Okay, so some of each. All right. So now let's look at treating diseases. So we've talked before about the genetic risks, the family history, and getting older. There's not a lot that you can do about those. But the list of diseases that impact your risk for dementia and that rev up the pathology of memory loss and dementia is pretty long. And we talked before about what's good for your brain is typically good for your body. There's not a huge difference. We're focusing specifically on the things that are good for the brain, but those things are all good for the body as well. And if you're doing things that help with addressing your overall health, those are probably going to help with memory loss as well. So it makes a difference if you have one or more of these. How many of you have one or more of the items listed on here are issues for you? Okay, so a few folks do. So what can you
Ask a question?
Yeah.
I had depression for a while back when I was in my earlier 50s, but it's been gone for a while. However, I continue to take medicine just to keep it all at bay. How would you evaluate that?
So it's best to have all of these diseases addressed, and that does help reduce your risk. Again, the timing of some of these makes a difference, and depression in midlife can have an impact, but you're doing what you can with addressing it now and staying on the meds, doing what you need to do to address it. There's actually conflicting studies. Some studies show that treatment helps, and some studies don't show an impact of that. But you're doing everything you can, and that is the important thing. That's the important thing with all of these. So what lifestyle changes can help impact depression? Anybody? Exercise is great.
Exactly. That's what
Exercising makes a huge difference in mood.
Having a positive attitude too, I think.
Having a positive attitude makes a huge difference. Absolutely. That's like the root issue in depression is focusing on things, and yeah, the thoughts keep getting worse. How about a good diet? Diet makes a big difference in depression. Eating the sugars and processed foods, our emotions also cycle, like our blood sugar goes up and down. So we've just talked about most of the pillars of FAST, right? We talked about food, we talked about activity, we talked about thoughts. So the things that we're talking about doing for helping brain health will help our other conditions and diseases potentially as well. And then these are risk factors for the memory. So it's a cycle, right? And we are helping out in multiple aspects of that cycle. What can you do to help cardiovascular disease from a lifestyle standpoint?
All that we've been talking about.
Exactly. Yes, same things. Exercise, eat healthy. Yes, positive thoughts. Same things with diabetes, high blood pressure. These chronic diseases are almost all benefited by the different FAST criteria. These are what will help you. The healthy lifestyle addresses the risk factors as well as helping out your memory itself. And here's a couple other conditions that are modifiable. And these are exactly what we're talking about, right? A lack of getting physical activity, stress, and these all interact with each other. So we talked about if you have high stress, it impacts your ability to sleep. Your exercise can help you to be able to sleep, can help to relieve the stress. Social interaction can help. So these are all very intertwined with each other. So we've already mentioned that many of these diseases in midlife are bigger risks for dementia and Alzheimer's than even having them later in life. And a number of these increased dementia risk: obesity, diabetes, smoking. Interestingly, excessive use of alcohol is a bigger risk if you have the genetic risk factor for dementia, which is the ApoE4 gene. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But these are all the things we've been talking about: feelings of loneliness and social contacts. So here's a study of 2,000 people over 36 years, so another huge, long study. If you rated yourself as hopeless during midlife, it increased the risk of memory loss or mild cognitive impairment significantly, 30%, and Alzheimer's disease, 37%. Again, this is the reason that it's important to invest in your brain health as early as your 40s and 50s, because these are greatly impacting your risk. There was a study that showed that more intensive blood pressure control is more effective than just hitting the standards that are currently the targets. Currently, the target of the medical community is to get your systolic blood pressure below 140 millimeters of mercury. But if you actually get it lower, if you actually get it to the normal range, that has better outcomes. And regular physical activity, education, these are all the things we're talking about. Physical activity, brain activity, continuing to use your brain, whether it's at work, whether it's in your hobbies, any place you're doing it, continuing to have complexity and mental stimulation and social stimulation are shown to reduce the risk of dementia. So what can we do? Most of these are fast. Eat healthy as food, exercise and socialize and use your brain are the 3 subsegments of activity. Reducing stress is what we're talking about today. Quitting smoking and losing weight are the only ones that we didn't specifically call out as fast. And addressing these diseases, this is treat disease, particularly in midlife, the intensive blood pressure control, the positive mental attitude, which is what we're going to talk about tomorrow. And here's an intriguing one. Treat hearing loss. Did you know that hearing loss is actually a risk factor for dementia? And a third of people have it if they're 65 or older. So there's lots of hearing loss happening in the elderly, and only about 14% actually wear hearing aids. And that may be because it's not always covered by insurance and there's some stigmas, but whatever the reason, treating your hearing loss is important for ensuring that your memory is better. And there's a few different reasons for that. I mean, it also impacts your ability to socialize if you're not hearing well. It impacts using your brain some of the time because you're not going to be receiving all of the information that you would if you were hearing well. So here's a study at Johns Hopkins where they followed people for 12 years, and the chance of developing dementia was directly related to the severity of the hearing loss. So it's a linear relationship. The greater the hearing loss, the greater the risk of dementia. And the solution is wear the hearing aids. So, and the last study just shows that the hearing aids themselves actually improved the mental performance as well as quality of life. So we keep talking about the fact that the majority of the dementia cases are preventable. Here's another study that looked at the same thing. The number they calculated was that 35% of dementia is preventable by these risk factors. They have the same risk factors that we've been talking about. And has anyone tested themselves to know their ApoE4 status, whether they have the gene that puts them at risk for dementia? Anybody? Okay, you can go to organizations like 23andMe, and with a saliva test, they tell you something about your genetic makeup. And the ApoE4 gene is the one that is known to increase risk of dementia. If you have one ApoE4 allele, then it increases your risk to 4 times the rate of someone who doesn't have ApoE4. And if you have 2 of them, it increases your risk to 12 times the risk of someone who doesn't have any ApoE4 genes. It doesn't mean that you will get dementia, but it is a big risk factor. And interestingly, if you have the genetic risk, the unhealthy lifestyle is showing an even more pronounced impact on your risk. So if you do find out your status, this just tells you to do all the things that we're talking about doing anyway. So it does depend on how many risk factors you have and how long you had them and how intensely you had them. So people that have many of these diseases that we're talking about come together. I mean, obesity and hypertension and cardiovascular disease and diabetes are quite common to be seen together. And that's a lot of risk factors. So the more risk factors and the longer you've had them, and of course your age, increases your risk. So it just means we should be that much more invested in making a difference and doing what we can to address all of the different factors that we've been talking about and employ plans in every one of the pillars of the FAST protocol. Does anybody have questions or thoughts about what we've covered today?
I had a man, this is probably 15 years ago or so. He was retired and he came in and he was sort of depressed. And at the end of counseling a couple of times, he comes back and says, "Enough of this adult daycare stuff. I'm going back to work." So my question is, I often wonder about people who might get addicted to stress.
Oh yeah.
And kind of can't live without it. They have to have a certain level of stress or else they start feeling their personality sort of disintegrate here. I guess there's also something called eustress, positive stress, that if you don't have the eustress, then you start feeling some level of, how can I say it, like becoming emotionally dismembered somehow.
Would you say that those people lack purpose in life?
I think the former man I was referring to, his work was his perfect purpose.
Yeah.
It was his identity. That's
Yes.
that was not only what he did, it was who he was. You know?
Yeah. I think a lot of this goes to our beliefs, which we'll talk about tomorrow, our thoughts in general. And and if we believe that stress is actually something positive, then we're going to behave differently than if we understand the damage that it's doing to our body. But I do think our society, on both sleep and stress, our society sends lots of negative signals, because particularly in the United States and particularly in the larger metropolitan areas, we're very productivity oriented, task oriented. I mean, that's been a huge thing in my life, that I'm making different choices now, but I spent many decades loving going as fast as I could go and being as busy as I could go and give me more pressure.
Achievement.
Yeah.
How about, I'm turning the page a little bit, but I'm wondering about the connection between memory loss and even MCI, you know, lower level, and suicide. I wonder if memory loss and as a risk factor for suicide.
That is a really good question. I would have to look that up. I think that it may be more relevant in mild cognitive impairment, because you still have enough motivation and cognitive awareness to take action. I think there's many people, when you get to even a moderate level of dementia, most people start becoming more and more sedentary and more disengaged. And I don't know, I mean, you see this in depression with many of the drugs that are indicated for treatment of depression. They actually increase the suicide rate. And I think part of that is because when you're really depressed, you don't have enough motivation to do anything about the way you feel. And then as you start feeling better, you now have enough motivation to take action, and then people take action. So I think when you're far enough along, those people probably aren't motivated enough to take action, even though they may hate their lives. I mean, my mother's friends admitted that they were praying that she would pass, because when she was in the memory ward, I mean, she couldn't do anything for herself. And 2 weeks after she got into the memory ward, she said her back hurt, and then she was in a wheelchair. And in the end, she couldn't even get out of bed, and they had to use a crane to lift her, to put a bedpan under her. But so it was a blessing. She did pass at that point. And, you know, she was my motivation for doing all this. And we lost her before I got to Glory Day Brain Booster. But when you're in the advanced stages, I don't think there's enough motivation to take action. But I will look at the literature and see.
Oh, it's fine. I mean,
yeah, it's an interesting question.
People are surprised to know the highest suicide rate are males over the age of 72. And I'm just wondering whether, to what degree, memory loss has an impact there. My sense is it probably does.
Well, I think the other thing that impacts that is retirement. Just like the example that you gave, I think many men in the kind of the classic lifestyle, work was their life. And I mean, I know my dad worked and my mom took care of everything else. And so when you don't have work to do, what's your purpose? What do you invest in? If that was your identity, I think a lot of people, they lose their purpose in life, and they lose hope, and then they don't want to live anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the statistics I've seen, there's quite a large number of people that die within 3 years of retiring. And I think that's not being able to adjust to finding other interests. I mean, that's a great time to give back in your life. But if people don't have the mentality or perspective or a way to engage, yeah, they can lose hope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting discussion. Okay. Any other comments? We might actually finish a little earlier today than usual. Does anyone have any other questions about things that we've discussed on previous days?
It's all been a great reminder of lifestyle change. I like your FAST acronym there. Actually, I mean, it's like you can't go wrong doing it.
Yes.
Whatever
Yeah.
else you do this, yeah.
That's right. There's no downsides to any of these things. They're
Right.
They're all good for you.
Hmm.
But the data is also pretty shocking on some of these. I mean, I was
Indeed.
surprised when I started looking at it to find out that 5 helpings of vegetables can prevent dementia in someone who's already got it. I mean, that's not something, again, I'm part of the medical community, but the medical community is not talking about that or really focusing on that. I think they will more and more. And what we're talking about, you're going to hear it in the future, because as I mentioned before, they've come to the realization that if a drug does get approved for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease, it's going to be in conjunction with lifestyle change, because lifestyle has such a dramatic impact on your health and on your memory. You can't overcome that by taking a pill. Now, maybe they can find a pill that can help augment it a little bit, because it'll have to be statistically significantly more effective with the pharmaceutical plus lifestyle change versus lifestyle change alone. But those who are studying this are clear that dementia is more of a lifestyle disease than it is a genetic disease.
Yeah.
There's only a small percent of people who have dementia who have the ApoE4 gene.
That's a huge statement. That, you know,
Yeah.
dementia is as much a lifestyle disease as it is a genetic disease, or more a lifestyle.
More so, quite a bit more so.
That's the message I think this whole course is saying. That's what you're saying here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like 4% of cases of dementia would be eliminated if you eliminated the ApoE4 risk factor.
No kidding.
50%. It's something, I would have to look it up again, but it's a small number of people that, if you look at the population that has dementia, and of course it's additional risk factors. I mean, we just saw if you have the ApoE4 gene, then your lifestyle is even more important. So
Right.
It wasn't just the gene that gave them the dementia, even in those who have the risk gene, the ApoE4. It was the ApoE4 plus the lifestyle. So now they may discover more genes that are responsible. It may be that we haven't identified all of the genetic risk factors. And I know there are folks looking at that, but from what we know today, dementia is much more a lifestyle disease than a genetic disease.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Okay, do we want to do our daily declaration for those who are comfortable doing it?
Yeah.
Okay, I value
Value
my
my
brain. I
I
thank
thank
my brain
brain
for all it has
it has
done for me.
Done.
I choose to invest in my health,
and my
Invest
brain
in
health.
brain health.
and my
I
brain
will
Will
take
take
action
take action
to ensure that I
ensure
keep
I
my
keep
memory.
my memory.
Yeah. Okay, and our homework today is you can look back at your brain health habits quiz that you did on the first day and think about which categories are the most important for you to take action in. Because some people, you know, like Susan works out and goes to the gym, like she's got that one down. So some of them are not issues for us. Some people are eating really healthy and that's not their issue. So pick your area that can be most impacted by your changes. And I would encourage you to write a 90-day plan. Like pick a handful of things you want to do, whether it's I'm going to eat these vegetables and I'm going to have berries for breakfast every other day. But the act of writing makes a difference. Again, we're engaging our brain in another way, just like speaking out loud helps to engage our brain. So now there may be a path to get there. You can think about the fact that, okay, you want to be walking 45 minutes, 5 days a week in 3 months from now, but you can't really do quite that much now. So it's fine if you're doing a path of getting there. I think Justin gave a great example earlier today that if you try and go too fast with exercise, it can be an issue and you can get discouraged. So pick a path to getting there that's very reasonable and achievable, but we want to celebrate our victories and, as we talked about today, have a goal, know what our goal is and where we want to go, because you can't hit your goal, your target, if you haven't chosen a target.
Okay.
Any other questions or thoughts? We might give you 5 minutes back today. We're good?
Very good.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it's great to be with you all and see you. Thank you for your consistency in coming, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow when we talk about thoughts and how important the things you choose to think about are in determining your mood, your actions, your whole life.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Thank you,
Thank you
Susan.
very much.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you,
Great.
Susan.
Take care.
See you tomorrow.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.